This is basically everything you need to know about Minecraft items. Everything from facts to tips to dark secrets, it's all here. When they were first added in, shears were originally supposed to be used to defuse TNT, but it didn't make it into the final version, which I think is a shame. It would have been fun to carry around a pair of shears the next time they are doing TNT combat, but I guess a water bucket could do the job just as well, and for only 1 extra iron ingot. In Bedrock Edition, if you were to get a name tag and name an armor stand dinner bone, it'll flip upside down like every other mob, but in Java, that just isn't the case, proving once again that armor stands are way worse on Java Edition than they've ever been on Bedrock. When you're on multiplayer, it's nice to offer some starting gear to the new players, but how do you guarantee that that stuff only goes to those who need it, instead of the rich players who are looking for free handouts? Well, odd as it may seem, this book could do the trick. As RaiseWorks demonstrates, having a book written like so can overload the data and cause a player with too many items in their inventory to get kicked out when they open up the chest. But if you have nothing, it works as planned. And though I barely understand the science behind it, it is a cool system. If we were to open up the book and quill in Bedrock, you'll notice that we can see 2 pages at once, while in Java, we're only seeing 1 at a time, which is a little more straightforward, but on Bedrock it actually feels like a book. And if only it was easier to type on console. In Bedrock Edition only, if you were shot by a tipped arrow that you blocked with a shield, while that would deflect the direct damage that you get from the arrow, you would still get the potion effect from the tipped arrow, which is a bit confusing. But if you think about it, we made these arrows using lingering potions. Maybe some of that lingering effect still exists. And that big why if you blocked it, you're still gonna get that potion effect. Sorry.
You've likely heard the cat music disc, but did you know there's a secret dog music disc as well? If not, I don't blame you, it's hard to find. Exclusively on the Legacy Console Edition, there was an extra dog track that played at the end of the cat music disc, meaning the cat music disc in that version was the longest disc in the game.
The chest boat still has one fatal flaw. If you drop it onto a slime block, it'll bounce a bit before breaking into blocks and sticks, just like the old boats used to. If you were to throw out all of your items onto the ground in a specific order, then you'll notice that as soon as you go to try to pick them up, the items will enter your inventory in the exact same order that you threw them onto the ground. And this becomes instantly noticeable when you play something like PvP, and you have to throw out different items onto the ground to try and sort through your inventory in Hunger Games. So if you forgot to pick up that pair of chainmail leggings the first time around, don't worry, it's gonna cycle back and all will be clear. The next time that you're trying to cure your villagers, make sure to have this on your crossbow, since by using an arrow that's tipped in the weakness effect in combination with a piercing 4 crossbow, it's technically possible to cure 4 villagers at once. And better yet, when that arrow hits a wall, because you have the piercing enchantment, you're also able to pick it up and reuse it, giving you a violent but perhaps necessary way to cure all of your villagers in a cheap manner.
In Bedrock Edition, if you put a trident in a dispenser, it'll be shot out as a projectile, which is a lot better than what happens in Java. Over there it just drops as an item would. So for those of you on Bedrock Edition, consider adding this into your next deadly builds.
Ever since 1.9, Java's had it where you need to attack with a cooldown to be able to get the full strength out of your attack. But in Bedrock, that's not a feature that's added in, so you can spam to your heart's content and win the fight that way.
Minecraft has its fair share of rare items. Turns out that there are even rarer names. In vanilla, there are only 3 items obtainable in survival with a magenta tinted name, those being the dragon egg, the enchanted golden apple, and the thing banner pattern. And if you ask me, one of those things is not like the others, but if you have them, feel free to show off.
Armor stands seem pretty passive. I mean, it's a bunch of sticks on a slab. How bad could that be? But truth is, they can be a bit more feisty than they seem, and you'll see as much if you give them a piece of Thorn's enchanted armor. With this, the enchantment applies the same just as it would with us, which I'll admit is a pretty funny sight. And while it doesn't do a lot of damage, you'll still want to make sure that you take off your armor like this instead of just punching it off. When skew was first added to Minecraft, it was originally called turtle shell pieces, which isn't all that surprising, it's what they are, but after some players pointed out that it's actually a more technical term to use the word skewed, then it was changed. This item never made it into Minecraft, but if you check back within the game's files for snapshot 19W34A, there was a texture for the crystallized honey item that was added to the game, but when snapshot 19W42A came out, that same texture got removed. And apparently this was because, according to one of the Minecraft gameplay developers, it was never actually intended to come out in the game, but it was still fun to get a couple of theories and ideas surrounding them before they were eventually removed anyway.
It's possible to enchant a recovery compass, but only for a cruel joke. If you have a Curse of Vanishing book, you can attach it to your recovery compass in an anvil, but obviously this wouldn't do you much good considering that the compass would disappear on death, and then you couldn't use it to find the rest of your stuff anyway, but it might make for a good prank to play on your friends.
If you've ever named an item in an anvil, you're aware that any custom name is bound to end up in italics, but strange as it may seem, Bedrock has a way to avoid that. See, over here we can use the Unicode symbol like so to keep our text upright, and the results not only look nice, but they open up a world of possibilities for pranking your friends, which might just be your cue to give them an enchanted stone pickaxe, name it as a netherite one, and then see how long it takes for them to notice. During the development stages of Minecraft, the axe looked a little different, since back in Minecraft in dev, the axe's texture was double-sided like a battle axe, which seems pretty impractical when you're just trying to cut down a tree that's right in front of you, which is probably why the texture was changed just a few days later, and then changed again so that it faced the other way that we're now familiar with.
At some point, I think we've all heard Minecraft's music discs, and even though some are better than others, they've each got a unique identity, and I'd say that disc 11 definitely fits that description. While it's a bit of a chore to listen to it all, you might not have noticed that it lasts for 1 minute, 11 seconds, and 111 milliseconds exactly. All of it absolutely dreadful.
If you have this potion in Minecraft, you're breaking the rules, because in vanilla Minecraft, there's no way to craft this potion. But if you use this give command to give yourself a potion with no NBT tags, it technically has no potion effect that goes along with it. But even if you can't get this item within survival, there is still a way to see it, since if you look at the icon for the local brewery advancement window, you'll see it's the same potion. So gone, but not forgotten. If we were to cast a fishing rod and then zoom in, you'll notice that in Java, the fishing bobber is a 2D texture, but in Bedrock, it's a 3D modeled cube. And why the difference, I'm not exactly sure. It seems like more effort to do the 3D cube anyway, but it does fit Minecraft a little better, so I think it's fair. If we were to apply a name tag to this mob and then kill the bigger slime, did you know that even all the small slimes that come from it will still keep their name tags? Which surely means that just from one size 8 slime, we can get a whole bunch of duplicates running around. Which is good to know that if you feel bad killing one Lola, at least there's gonna be a lot more to take her place.
By this point, I think we're all plenty aware that Mojang made Minecraft. I mean, it's kind of hard not to notice. But by chance you didn't, this secret might help you realize. As others have noted, when you look through the symbols on the end crystal, they can be rearranged to spell out none other than the studio's name, Mojang. And that's probably the coolest signature I've ever seen.
Now, saving yourself from a fall with a water bucket is nothing new. And if you ask me, it's been done to death. So how about we try to get a bit more creative for our MLG save and turn to potions instead? No joke, using something like a slow falling potion, we're capable to make a safe landing from a dangerous fall. And to pull this off, the technique isn't too different from what it is for the water bucket, since it all hinges on pressing right click at the right time. And if you do that, your legs will thank you. This exclusive item is only found in Education Edition, since when you use the camera item or entity, you're able to get yourself the exclusive photo item, which is handy since that game doesn't have a screenshot function, and you can even put the item inside of an item frame, which I think looks great. Definitely a lot better than some custom map art. When you're talking about items, mob drops are sure to come up, but figuring out what those mob drops are is its own problem, and Notch definitely came across that. So that's why in the development stage for Java Edition, zombies used to drop feathers, and according to the developer, he didn't know what else they should drop, and it wasn't until the 1.8 beta pre-release that he finally got his replacement.
To speed up game development, it's nice to cut corners when you can, and Minecraft's textures have plenty of examples of that. But what's weirder still is which they decide to reuse and which they make from scratch. Like, the bucket of cod and bucket of tropical fish are recolorations, but the item sprites themselves are different, and I don't get why you'd only do half the assignment.
Here's how to make your dripstone even deadlier. Use a fishing rod. Silly as that might sound, as this user shows us, it's entirely possible. If you find yourself in a situation like this, place the dripstone underneath the block, and then when you break its support block, you can catch onto the dripstone as an entity with your bobber, and use that to throw towards your enemies. So while getting the spacing might still be pretty tough to do this, when you pull it off and kill your friend, it really is something special. And this might be the only dripstone kill that's able to top the one that Green got on Double Life. If you compare the loading animation for a crossbow when you're in first person in Bedrock and in Java, you notice that the difference that the Bedrock plays more to the side while the Java happens in the middle. What happens if you smelt mushrooms? Well, in every other version, nothing. You don't even need to cook them for mushroom stew. But in Pocket Edition, it used to be possible to smelt red mushrooms to get, well, red dye, which seems like a lot of hassle to go through considering that you could just craft a rose and get the same results. This floor makes it impossible to do a water bucket save, and the reason being is this inverted slab. See, given how the game mechanics work, anyone who tries to place down water like so for a landing will instead create a waterlogged half slab, and since it is facing like this, they won't be able to land in the water side of the slab, but instead just break their legs. Ever since the 1.16 update, we've now had support for adding different emojis in the Java edition of Minecraft-related items, like pickaxes, swords, and tridents, and even potions, both splash and regular, which seems like a pretty minor feature to add, but it could make for some extra cool signage, especially if you're trying to sell these different items in a shop.
You can craft honey bottles into honey blocks. That's not a surprise, that's how you get them in the first place. But with those same 4 glass bottles, you can craft the honey blocks back into the bottle. This makes perhaps the weirdest way to store your honey, and the fact that this can be uncrafted while nether wart blocks can't seems even stranger.
This fishing rod could be a deadly weapon, since back in old forms of PvP, before the combat update in 1.9, it was possible to use a fishing rod's bobber to stun your enemy and then hit them with a couple of combos with your sword. And that'd be why if you're on a legacy PvP server, you'd see these fishing rods going around. Throwing a splash potion is an exact science, and some of you likely know that it's better to land one of these on your noggin than it is on your feet. But is the same true for bottles of enchanting? Well, Well, when you test both ways, it's a myth. As it turns out, it doesn't make any difference where you throw these. So pick your favorite and it'll work just the same. Before you try fishing, you should look up first. Since if you're fishing in an area where you don't see clear sky above the water, that'll double your waiting time. So while it might sound safe and convenient to fish inside a cave, it's not going to be that convenient having to wait double the time as opposed to fishing up on the surface. Not to mention the fact that you also get a bonus when it rains outside. So don't waste your time and just move your bobber upstairs. Never buy this from a villager, because even though the Woodland Mansion Explorer map might sound like a useful item to get, it could be a ripoff. Since as a result of the world generation, there could be times that you buy this map for the cartographer, but the Explorer map doesn't actually show where the structure does exist, but rather where it would have existed if the generation didn't mess up. And really, it's not that useful to get a map that tells me where a Woodland Mansion would have been when I was really hoping to find where one actually is. I think I'd rather just use my eyes for this.
Unlike the rest of the leather armor set, leather boots are the only piece that's named the same as the other armor sets, since the leather helmet is called a cap, the leather chestplate is a tunic, and the leather leggings are called pants, or trousers in the UK version.
Here's how to moonwalk in Minecraft. All we need is an elytra. First off, we're gonna fly down to the ocean, and then hold up the spacebar so that we push ourselves back up to the top of the water. And then from there, we can just start walking backwards, which is a fun sight for sure, but remember, this will use up some of your elytra durability, proving that even the best dance moves have their expiration date at some point. You might not have noticed this, but I don't know when you ever would have seen it. But on the off chance that you were to stand next to a cocoa bean and then let it grow, then it's true that as the cocoa bean gets bigger, it'll push the player down into crawl mode. That way you're not going to be suffocating when you stand next to it. But why you would be waiting right next to a cocoa bean to grow anyways, I've got no clue. In Bedrock Edition, it's possible to make a map with just one piece of paper using a cartography table, which is a lot cheaper than it is on Java. Although you're not actually going to be able to see where you are in that map until you craft it with a compass, which in that way, the two versions are similar.
Minecraft's glowstone used to look like this. It had a yellow-green color when it was added in the alpha stage, and wasn't changed until the texture update of 1.14. And between that change and the retexture for Netherrack, 1.14 really made the Nether look a whole lot different.
Adventure mode is an interesting concept, but it's not a perfect system. For instance, say a playtester comes across a flint and steel. Well, without this tag, they can't spark fires or light nether portals, but they can still ignite creepers and TNT, and to me, that seems equally destructive, if not more so. If you were to wear a creeper head in Java Edition, then the detection range of a creeper that you stand next to gets cut in half, meaning it doesn't recognize that you're a threat until you get much closer. And the same goes if you're wearing a zombie head next to a zombie and a skeleton skull next to a skeleton. But in Bedrock, you'll still want to keep your distance. Before Archaeology got added in 1.20, it had been teased for 3 years prior to its initial release. And it looks like one of the things that Mojang couldn't decide on was how this brush was supposed to look, since it's had 3 different looks since it was initially released. This one with both a copper and an oxidized handle, this one that looked more like a paintbrush, and finally, the design that we've seen today. And honestly, I'm glad that we don't have to worry about another thing oxidizing for our copper. I don't exactly want to get struck by lightning while I'm holding one of these things.
Bone meal is a surprisingly powerful tool, and as someone who doesn't like waiting, it's essential for me. But apparently it's more robust than even I thought. While we're all familiar with bone meal on the top of a grass block, it can also work from the sides and bottom. It'll even work if a plant is already on top, making this super substance even easier to use.
Alright, pop quiz. Which one of these is coal and which one is charcoal? Well, when it was first added in, it was nearly impossible to tell the difference, considering that charcoal had the same texture as coal. And it wasn't until a few updates later that charcoal would get its own texture like this. But really, they both burn for the same amount of time and they have the same use, so there wasn't much of a drawback for getting them confused. Although I guess it would have been confusing to try and stack both of these together in a chest. I've played Bed Wars and Hunger Games hundreds of times with my friends, meaning I've shared countless pieces of armor, weapons, etc., any item you can think of. And somehow, in all of that time, I never realized that you could just hold down the Q key to throw out a steady stream of items. No, I would never do that. I would always just end up throwing it out of the inventory screen or mashing the Q button instead. And really, I don't know if it's all that practical, but now I know it's there, and maybe you do too. Minecraft has plenty of resources to craft with, but have you ever wondered which item gets the most use? Well, turns out the iron ingot takes the top slot at 34 crafting recipes, with planks following right behind at 33. And while I would have guessed that those were the other way around, it's still plenty of a reason to get yourself both an iron and a tree farm in the future. Instead of placing all these flowers by hand, we're gonna do it with a bow. Strange as it may seem, using the place feature command, we're able to swap out an entity for a decoration. So if we set up the execute command like this in a command block, that'll be able to turn our spray of arrows into a beautiful flower garden. And if you want to make this whole process even faster, I'd recommend using a multi-shot crossbow so you get even more of a spray at the end. Just make sure not to shoot anybody while they're enjoying the roses. This enchanted book is not supposed to exist, because it's enchanted with, well, Nothing. And the only way that it's possible to get such an illegal item is by using this command to give yourself an enchanted book with no other NBT tags. And there you go, it's enchanted, yet pointless.
Look closely, you might be able to spot the difference in these textures. And no, it's not just that one has a fish and the other doesn't, but actually the bucket texture in this sprite is 1 pixel lower than the original. And this is supposedly intentional, since the artist Japper claims it's due to the weight of the fish.
Do not underestimate tipped arrows, because silly as it may seem, we only need to shoot ourselves with one of these to go sky high. As Caesar shows off, if we were to give ourselves the slow falling potion effect and then use a Riptide Trident, then we'll be able to keep that same speed going right up in a 45-degree angle. And from there, forget about using rockets for your Elytra, we're already well into takeoff. And as pointed out in this comment, the reason that we use arrows in the first place is that the 11-second duration of the effect makes sure that it's only going to be active on the way up, because otherwise we'd just be kind of slow falling through the air with our Elytra, which is a little disappointing when you get that much speed on the way up. Lily pads don't just have to be placed on water sources, they also work on waterlogged blocks, meaning that with this setup, we can place our lily pads directly onto our drip leaves, which offers a nice decoration to add to your next pond. And it also gives us a way to stand on top of the drip leaf without it falling down, both of which are nice to see. You probably know that carpets can be placed over string, but what about these blocks? Because the truth is that carpet only needs to be placed over any non-air block, which oddly enough means that it's completely fine to bridge with carpet over water, grass, fire, snow, and even lava blocks. And while I wouldn't recommend using only a piece of cloth to keep you safe from the lava beneath, as this user did show, it's clearly possible, just maybe not the most safe. Have you ever wondered if sugarcane grows faster on sand or dirt? Well, apparently it doesn't matter. But it does matter whether you grow it in Bedrock or Java Edition, since in Bedrock only, we can bone meal sugarcane to speed up the growth.
How rare would it be to get all the wither skulls for a wither in one go? If you do the maths, to get 3 wither skeleton skull drops in a row, it would be a 1 in 64,000 chance. That's a 0.0015% chance, or in other words, highly unlikely.
If you were to have a Minecraft clock in your inventory and then change the time using commands, you'll notice that the clock has to rapidly spin to catch up to what the current time is. And as is in a regular Minecraft day, each of those 64 frames of animation is only going to play for about 19 seconds a frame, given that a full Minecraft day is 20 minutes. Or if you wanted to, you could type in the time set command like this, and that way the clock will have to catch up and play through all those animation frames just like that. Chainmail armor is somewhat of a white whale to the Minecraft world. After all, as long as it's been around, there's been no way to craft it without some kind of cheat. And after Mojang removed the recipe using fire, we've been out of luck to use this armor in our worlds. That is, until 1.16 came around, and then we finally got chains added into the game. But at that point, when it seemed like we had a chance, it turned out that chains could only be used for decoration, nothing else. Which is safe to say, a bit disappointing. While in creative mode, it's possible to add any enchantment that you'd like to any item, including items that can't be enchanted normally, which means that if you really wanted to, you could get yourself a fire aspect water bucket, which doesn't make a lot of sense, but at least you're offering both the problem and the solution. If you break this path block in Java, you're just gonna get a dirt block. By breaking that same path block using Silk Touch in Bedrock, then you're able to get the path block as an actual item, which in Java is only possible through the use of commands.
Crafting a boat out of obsidian sounds safe, but it's actually stupid, since as we see in the April Fool's snapshot called the Love and Hugs update, crafting one of these obsidian boats is only good for you sinking down to the bottom of the ocean. Funny, sure, but definitely not my first choice for sailing. If only these could float on lava.
If you take a close look at your netherite tools, you'll notice that they're different from your regular tools in more ways than one, since that netherite ingot that we added in the smithing table also seems to have added into the handle on the sprite, giving us the only tools in the game that don't have a stick for their handle, which I think makes sense. It explains how we reinforce all of the tools' durability instead of just the top for the pickaxe. If you can get your hands on a Totem of Undying, it's an invaluable resource to have, but it does mean we give up an offhand slot to make it work. Though for what it's worth, the 3DS version of Minecraft lets the totem work in any of the hotbar slots, since there's no offhand feature in that version, which is nice, but I'd rather stick to PC. You should be careful pressing the jump button in Bedrock Edition, because while flying with an Elytra, if you were to press the jump button again, it'll cancel out your gliding and you'll just be falling like that. Luckily in Java, the same doesn't happen, making it a lot safer.
Ender pearls can be a real lifesaver, especially when you're traveling in the end. Or they would be if I could get the angle right, but training that arc isn't always easy, though it turns out that ender pearls and snowballs can be thrown at the same range, meaning we can figure out our trajectory before losing any hearts. And that extra prep makes all the difference.
If you have an efficiency 5 shovel, you're doing it wrong. Or I should say you're doing overkill, because really an efficiency 4 diamond or netherite shovel is already fast enough to instantly mine every shovelable block. So by going above and beyond to try and get yourself an efficiency 5, it's really pointless. So really stick to efficiency 4 and save your extra levels for Silk Touch or something. If you were to fish up an item with a fishing rod, it normally flies up to you, but it turns out that if you step to the side, the item's still flying, and in fact it'll just completely pass you by. Which I guess makes sense, but it's still a funny sight to see from this angle. And at this point, would it be fly fishing or fish flying? I have no clue.
What was the first item in Minecraft? While something like the apple has a texture dating back to before the game's release, it was actually the item arrows that was first added to the Java Edition survival test. And you could fire these by pressing the tab button. And for a bonus fact, skeletons could even fire a special purple arrow.
If you're playing in normal difficulty and you sit inactive within a minecart, then no matter how long you sit there, your hunger bar will never deplete, which essentially gives you a way to never starve to death. But it's pretty boring, so I'd rather just go get some food and go about it that way. If you have yourself a flame bow, you're able to shoot powdered snow blocks to destroy them. Though I honestly don't know why you'd do this instead of a shovel or a bucket, but it does make for a fun pastime. And who knows, it might be good for a hidden snow minigame, where you'd have to shoot the powdered snow within a sea of regular snow. And to me, that feels like the kind of challenge you'd see out of Breath of the Wild. You see, in Java, we see a gold nugget as just that, something that you can use to craft a gold ingot, but that's about it. But in Bedrock, it's fuel, for some reason. When I first heard of this, I thought, there's just no way. But yeah, if you try it, it does in fact burn. But it's not even a good fuel source. You need about 12 of them just to smelt up one item. But if you're looking to burn some cash, I guess this does the trick.
You've probably seen this item before, but not like this. With the use of commands, you're able to give yourself a physical knowledge book like this. And by using that item, it'll grant the player access to new recipes to try out with the other green knowledge book, the one that you find on the crafting screen.
The spyglass is one of the cooler additions in the 1.17 update, and it's a nice alternative to Optifine Zoom when you need a closer look. But something tells me this is a bit too close. Sure enough, using the /item replace command, you can place a spyglass on Steve's head and have it appear smack dab in the center of the face. Riptide is a fantastic enchantment, and it's definitely a powerful one when mixed with a rainstorm. But even though it's great, it still has a few quirks I can't quite make sense of. For example, if we do a side-by-side comparison of using Riptide in a shallow pool versus something with a bit more depth, the difference is night and day, and for some reason, the shallow option will always win out against the competition. And while I can't quite figure out why this could be, it does allow us to get some newfound height and distance with our trident. So next time you're looking for a boost, maybe use your water bucket instead of visiting the ocean.
Here's how to get a pet trident. If you have a loyalty enchanted trident and you throw it, it'll follow you until it goes into your inventory. But if you fill your inventory after throwing it, it can't return, so it just hovers around the player like this. You can even do this with multiple tridents, creating quite the hectic sight.
As it is, leather armor is supposed to be this early game item that you can get to start off, but it almost never is, because as it turns out, it's actually more expensive to get than regular iron ingots. I mean, just consider the fact that not every cow that you kill drops leather, whereas every iron ore that I mine is always going to drop at least some amount of raw ore. And that alone means that it'll always take less mining than killing to get yourself a full set of armor. But it's also not like cows are that easy to find, so unless you find yourself a leather shirt in a shipwreck, I'd figure that most of us don't even put this on before we get into the better stuff. Since Minecraft has so many items, you could see a texture 100 times without taking the time to study the details, and I think the iron door fits that category. Now, from this zoomed out view, it looks the same as any door that we put in our hotbar, but take a closer look at the item itself, and you'll notice that the door doesn't have a handle in its sprite, which honestly seems like a clever detail. After all, we can't open the door without a redstone signal, so it makes sense there's no player-accessible handle on the thing. And it's amazing to me how just 2 little extra pixels can really show how much care went into the design. Landing a shot with a bow and arrow is easier said than done. However, it looks like the game might be partially to blame. See, if you were to stand close to a wall and fire off several shots without moving, you'll notice that the arrows fall slightly to the right of your crosshair. And if you change to left-handed in the settings, it's the opposite, which I guess makes some sense.
Minecraft is synonymous with customization, so obviously the fireworks fit with that motif. But with all the different ways to deck out your rockets, have you ever wondered how many options we have to choose from? Well, apparently there are 2 to the 10,136 distinct fireworks to use. And that's more than the number of atoms in the universe, which is just insane.
As we all know, Minecraft's a 3D game, but that doesn't mean everything in the game is a 3D model. For instance, even though things like tools might look 3D when held in your hand, that just isn't so. But rather, the game stitches together these 2D textures into somewhat of a 3D model, which is interesting, but it does leave imperfections, mostly seen along the pixels on the side. And folks, it just takes one quick look at the Vanilla Tweaks texture pack to see that a stitch fix is possible, and hopefully we could see such in a new update. Impaling is a weird enchantment, because while it's meant to apply extra damage to underwater mobs, in Java it doesn't work on drowned, since they're classified as undead. And thankfully, Bedrock cleans this up, and the enchantment works on any and all mobs that are underwater or under the rain. If you go to enchant your bow and go for a level 1 enchantment, then if you have no bookshelves nearby, the first level 1 enchantment will always be power 1. Seriously, try this on however many bows that you want, you're not gonna get anything else. Which might be helpful if you're looking for a low-powered enchantment in PvP. It's better to have power 1 on your bow instead of unbreaking 1. So I'd rather go for the cheaper and simpler option in this case.
When they were first added, added, Minecraft saplings used to look like this. They were only 2 colors, just tan and green, but only 6 days later they were given a new texture that looks a lot more like how they look today.
Now, this armor might look overpowered, but it's actually not that much, since even though back in 1.14 you could get yourself a full set of armor with every single protection enchantment, that was actually unnecessary, since the level of protection for certain damage types is already capped. So even if you went through the effort of getting every single protection put on your armor, you weren't even seeing the full benefits of it. And at the very least, let's hope that when you were putting all those enchantments on, you added on mending as well, because otherwise I think you're gonna get the too expensive message in the Anvil, and then it's a lost cause. But it is right, this definitely is too expensive. Minecraft veterans remember a time where we didn't need to use blaze powder to brew up our potions. So why did this change? Well, according to one of the game's developers, Sarge, it's so that the game's progression wouldn't be thrown off. Since when they added in igloos, it would have been less important to go to the Nether if you could just find a brewing stand right underneath one in the overworld. In older versions of Minecraft, it used to be possible to buy the Eye of Ender item, and this made the cleric villager indispensable for speedruns, considering that with this trade, you didn't even need to go to the Nether to get blaze powder for your Eyes of Ender. But during the snapshots for Java Edition 1.9, this did get balanced so that you couldn't just skip this integral part of the game, which is a bummer, but I think speedrunners are doing just fine without it. If you've messed around with Minecraft modding, you know there are plenty of files to sort through, and hidden in those files are some sneaky details. For instance, did you know that axes were originally referred to as hatchets in the game's code, but since Java 1.13, the language files now reflect the current name. But since the axes are still one-handed, I could see it either way. If you build your water elevators like this, you're doing it wrong. Instead, using item frames, we can make it accessible from all sides, instead of this one using signs. And hey, it's a lot less obtrusive too, especially if you use map art as a disguise. Minecraft has been through a lot of updates over the years, meaning that some things are bound to fall to the cracks. And a prime example of that neglect seems to be the white tulips, though not with the flower, but with the crafting recipe. See, when the flower was added in, white dye didn't exist. Rather, we just used bone meal. So to keep the flowers from crafting into bone paste, Mojang decided to use light gray dye instead. However, now that we actually do have white dye in the game, it seems like we should change the recipe to match the description.
Unlike us, arrows don't slow down while passing through cobwebs, nor do snowballs or ender pearls, which might just mean that the fastest way through a cobweb trap is to shoot your shot instead of wasting time with a sword.
With the recent addition of glowing and invisible variants, there's even more of a reason to use item frames inside of your creative builds. But that only makes this problem all that more noticeable, since when in creative, if you punch an item to get it out of a frame, much like you would in survival, it doesn't drop the item, but just deletes it instead. And that can be quite annoying and definitely unintuitive. So save us the hassle and just drop the item as is. If you look closely, you'll notice that the chest that's inside of the chest bow isn't the same chest as the one that's inside of the minecart, but rather the chest texture that shows in the chest bow is 12 by 12 pixels, while the one in the actual block is 14 by 14. But I guess that just goes to show that those 2 extra pixels weren't all that necessary, because I didn't even notice. Sometimes in Minecraft, you don't need to be carrying around a lot of levels, but since there's no way to put that EXP into, I don't know, a bottle, then fortunately there is still an option that's even weirder. When you take out an item from smelting in a furnace, you get a little bit of EXP. But what's interesting about that feature is that it doesn't just give you the EXP for that item, it gives you EXP for every item smelted up until that point. Meaning that using furnaces, you can essentially create EXP batteries on demand. And when you can store more EXP than you get from the dragon fight in one of these, I think we got an oversight. This fact will save you a lot of experience, because while we normally rename our items one at a time, it turns out that if you put a stack of 64 name tags into an anvil, then for the low cost of 1 experience level, you can surely rename all of them. Which is my favorite way of getting a bunch of name tags changed into dinner bones so that I can have those to keep my mobs around.
What would you call this item? Well, nowadays it's named the Glistering Melon. Prior to snapshot 18W20B, it was known in the game's files as Speckled Melon, which doesn't sound terribly appetizing, but neither does the word glistering, come to think of it.
Here's how to light up your igloo without turning it into a water waste. Since while it's true that things like glowstone and torches are going to melt the snow, if you were to use redstone dust, torches, or even candles and soul torches, none of those will melt any of your ice or snow, giving you the perfect way to illuminate your Fortress of Solitude, and also keep it a Fortress of Solitude by making sure no mobs can spawn inside. While we choose to get our cocoa beans from the jungle, in Pocket Edition, the way they used to get these was by crafting it together with an ink sac, a red dye, and a dandelion yellow, which is a really peculiar sight to see laid out like this. But I guess the idea was that you were trying to mix together different dyes to get a brownish color, and that much makes sense, but to get cocoa beans themselves, then it just seems so weird, and you can see why they patched it out. Stop using bone meal. Instead, you gotta use super fertilizer. Strange as it may seem, this is actually an item that Mojang's added to Minecraft, and to even get this, we'll need to mix together together ammonia and phosphorus in a lab table. But from that point, this behaves a lot like old bone meal used to, where we can grow our plants and trees right up to maturity just like that. But it's a lot harder to farm than regular bone meal, so that's gotta be the drawback. This might look like a magic wand, but it's actually a sparkler. And the way that we get this is by mixing together chloride and magnesium with a stick in the Education Edition. And actually using different kinds of chloride could give you different colors, such as calcium chloride for an orange one, or tungsten chloride for a green one. And unfortunately, while these give off particles, they don't actually give off any light, meaning these are really more of a party trick than anything useful.
This mob doesn't exist, so why is there a spawn egg for it? The truth is that the mask isn't some secret new mob, but really it's just that this sprite is the base texture Mojang uses to color shift for the other spawn egg textures. I suppose that means we'll have to look for hidden lore elsewhere.
Back in version 1.3, Flint used to look 3D, and if you studied it closely, you could see that the item had a shiny texture to it. But all of that changed in snapshot 18W43A, where the Flint item was changed to be a little bit more 2D, and that same shiny texture seemed to have gone away, making it look a lot less like a Minecraft diamond and a whole lot more boring. This is the worst piece of armor that's ever been added to Minecraft, but that's because it was a joke. See, in the so-called trendy update from Minecraft's April Fools, there was this item that was called the ankle monitor, and then if you put it on, it functioned much like the curse of binding. You'd never be able to take it off. And it also applied the slowness effect, making it a lot worse than those curse of binding boots you found anyway. Oh, and not to mention a bunch of annoying messages happening in your chat. When you're idling at a farm in Minecraft, there's not a lot to do. I mean, most of us would just go off and do something away from the screen, but if that's out of the question for you, then we'll have to find some other way to be productive. Now to start, get out a book and quill. And no, this isn't to take notes or anything, that book's actually our project. You see, the way that Minecraft scrolls through different pages, it's actually possible, in some weird way, to make flipbook animations in the game. Is it limited? Sure, but remember, someone remade Star Wars in ASCII art, so the possibility is pretty high. So if you're gonna be killing the time anyway, then you might as well make yourself a magnum opus. Of all the tools in Minecraft, the pickaxe is the only one that doesn't have a right-click function. Since we can use a hoe to till soil, a shovel to create pathland, we can use an axe on our copper blocks, and shears for, well, shearing, the pickaxe is really the odd one out, and I don't think it's gonna get a use feature anytime soon, since frankly, I don't even know what that would be.
You would never notice this in regular gameplay, but one end crystal is capable of healing multiple ender dragons at once. This becomes quickly noticeable when you summon in multiple dragons, as the crystal splits off different beams to heal the dragons.
In Java Edition, it's possible to light ice blocks on fire with a flint and steel, but in Bedrock, it's no use. So if you're hoping for a song of ice and fire, you're out of luck. Sorry. What's the right way to craft a bed? Well, nowadays the answer would depend on the color sheets you want, but in the past, all we had was the standard red. And with that meant we had a bunch of different ways to craft the same choice. In fact, between the 16 wools and 6 different planks, there used to be 3,456 ways just to craft this one bed.
This isn't leather armor, but actually it's called studded armor. This unused armor set only exists within the data for the items.png image in the game's files, and these specific sprites were ripped directly from Notch's old game, Legend of the Chambered 2, but they were removed before armor was ever implemented, making it just an Easter egg.
When you're exploring in Minecraft, we all know to pack a bunch of food, yet somehow I still never seem to bring enough. And would you believe it, that was even worse in the beta versions of Minecraft, since back then only the cookies would stack, and even then you could only have up to 8 of them in a given stack. And thankfully nowadays we've got much better pockets for our pork. In the future, we'll be able to stack potions like this, or at least that's the idea behind this combat test snapshot. Since to completely rework how PvP's done in Minecraft, Mojang's working on the idea that we'd be able to stack up the same potion to a stack of 16, which is a big change for inventory management considering that holding 16 potions currently looks like this. Not exactly easy to pack. Minecraft doesn't have a lot of flying mobs, and I think that's a missed opportunity, so to change that around, we can do so with the help of Elytras. See, with commands, you can actually attach Elytras to certain mobs, but it won't do anything until we set the fall flying tag to 1B. At that point, we can let them glide around and launch our first ever Minecraft mob airlines. Unfortunately, the Bedrock Edition doesn't allow for all items to be held in the offhand, but that doesn't mean every offhand item has a use. Take the Nautilus shells for example. For us, they do nothing in either slot, but the reason they work like this is because the drowned mobs have to hold them like so. So it is useless, but it's at least a fun detail.
With so many items to collect, it's only fair we have some way to show them off. And while item frames are a staple in the way that we decorate nowadays, prior to this Reddit post, it wasn't even considered. But sure enough, just like the ender chest and the flower pot, item frames made it in through a community suggestion. And thankfully so, I might add.
Silk Touch is a valuable enchantment to have. So valuable, in fact, that many of us don't want to waste it, which is why shears used to be so great. See, prior to 1.9, we could enchant shears with Silk Touch, and then use that enchantment elsewhere. Meaning, if you built with a lot of glass, put Silk Touch on your shears, and instead you've got an unbreakable glass remover, which was cool while it lasted. With the Nether update in 1.16, we got something of a counterpart to cobblestone. Here we could use blackstone as a substitute for crafting stone tools, furnaces, and even brewing stands. Which is nice, but it's not a complete replacement. For some reason, unlike cobblestone, blackstone can't be used to craft pistons or certain pieces of redstone equipment. Which, I get it, the Nether isn't exactly the place to do redstone machinery, but I also don't get only doing half the assignment. So why not give blackstone the proper welcome to the crafting side? Traveling across the different Minecraft biomes is a lot of fun, but while you're doing all that exploring, it's easy to miss the small details you pass by. And if you did take the time to stop and smell the roses, you might realize this cool fact about the flower forest biome. See, if you were to bone meal all of the blocks in the area, a grueling task, I know, you'd start to see a flower gradient like so. Since the game only generates one type of flower per each block in the space, you get some cool sights to see. So while you'll likely never see it this readily apparent again, I guess you and the forest now share a little secret.
Every great artist tends to sign their work, and apparently Minecraft textures are no different. Though I wouldn't blame you if you never noticed the hidden autographs on the armor stand, since they aren't visible on any part of the item or entity. But look at the texture file, and sure enough, both Sarge and Jappa have their names right here on the bottom, hidden from plain view.
I think we all can agree the channeling enchantment's pretty great. For one, not only is it fun to summon lightning like your last name is Odinson, but that very lightning allows you to change and manipulate different mobs. So when you're fed up of typical mushrooms and you're looking for a change, well, bam. It's great, but obviously all that lightning can get pretty dangerous. So if you're trying to do your magic without all the pain of electrocution, maybe try this. You see, by placing down an item frame, all you have to do is zap that and the job gets done the same way. Except this time, no one's getting hurt in the process. Which is nice, because really, there's no point in converting a corpse. This is the most detailed texture that Mojang's ever added to Minecraft, or that they kind of added. See, in the Infinite Snapshot for the April Fool's edition, there was a joke feature called a very fine item, and this item had a very fine texture of 64 by 64 pixels, which is a lot more than the 16 by 16 that we're used to. And while it's definitely not a realistic Minecraft texture like we're used to, at least the text is readable. That's gotta be something. Back in 2014, Microsoft famously purchased Mojang for a chunk of cash. So while we're all familiar with the Windows 10 version of Minecraft, did you know that there were Minecraft versions of Windows 10? Sure enough, 5 updates for Windows 10 were codenamed Redstone, which is cute, but I'm not sure it's worth $2.5 billion for that reference. Stop using a sword to try and break cobwebs, because instead, it's possible to break these even faster by using a water bucket. So next time that you're stuck down in a spider's domain, it'd be better to pour out some flowing water instead of wasting any durability on your diamond sword. The water's also a lot more reusable, so I doubt there's any objections. Why would you use daylight sensors as fuel? Well, I'm not sure, since the yield is only about 1.5 items smelted per sensor, but just the simple fact that you're able to cook with one of these is a surprise to me. And I guess this means that if you're looking for a solar-powered furnace, you can get one, but it won't be the way that you expect. If you were to tweak the game so that a panda eats the spyglass item, then since this obviously wasn't intended, when it takes a bite out of the spyglass, it creates the missing texture particles, which would explain these purple and black icons that you see here. And really, I don't blame Mojang for never coding and eating particles for the spyglass. Here's how to completely ruin a book and quill, because if you were to take the item inside of an anvil and then give it a new name before you write anything inside, then from that point, you can't write anything inside the book. So if you want to rename your manifesto, you should instead wait until after you've written something inside of it, and then rename it that way. Then it'll still function normally.
Mojang made this texture look even worse, but that was the point, since as of the texture update of 1.14, the fermented spider eye changed to look a lot more red and gooey than it did in the past, which is definitely more gross, but that's likely accurate to how a mix of spider eyes, mushrooms, and sugar would be in the real world anyway.
Let me introduce you to the wonderful world of ice bomb parkour, because in the Minecraft Education Edition, it's possible to create this secret item called an ice bomb, which is a projectile similar to an egg, but if you throw it at water, you're able to use it for parkour as well, which is a really fun feature. It's a shame that it's only stuck to this education lab. This arrow was never supposed to exist in Minecraft, so how did we get it? Well, by using the give command, you're able to get yourself some custom arrow variants like this one, and there you go. Potion variants of arrows that we were never supposed to have can function just the same, even if there's no potion associated with it. And I think this would open up a whole new slew of custom PvP maps that you should try out in the future. Because the combat changes were never added into Bedrock, that also means that the sweeping edge enchantment is only available in Java Minecraft. Considering there's no cooldown for your sword in Bedrock, I think it's a fair trade anyway. Structure voids are a weird block, and on Java, they aren't very useful to us builders. But on Bedrock, we can use these structure voids almost the same way as barrier blocks, except we can walk through them, allowing for some pretty neat build hacks.
If you've messed around with Minecraft's paintings, you've probably seen this before. And while the skull on fire is not only iconic, it also contains a neat detail. The background of the shot is actually a screenshot from Minecraft Alpha. And more surprisingly, a team actually found the seed from this screenshot and recreated it years later, which is some crazy dedication for sure.
And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?